Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Online Sociologist. I'm Ryan. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most brilliant and most overlooked figures in classical sociology, Georg Simmel. But before we do, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more content related to sociology. Now, when people rattle off the names of the giants of classical sociology, you hear Emil Durkheim, Karl Marx, and Max Weber. But Georg Simmel? He's kind of like Steve Wozniak of Apple. He doesn't get the accolades like a Steve Jobs, but his work was just as, if not more, important. Now, Simmel never left behind a school of thought or disciples, but he did help solidify sociology's contribution to academic thought while also positioning it as a unique and important way of seeing society. Simmel's story starts at the heart of Berlin, where he was born on March 1st, 1858. The sociologist Louis Koser compared his birthplace to New York City's Times Square. For Koser, this was a symbolically perfect origin for someone who spent his life analyzing not only cities and social contradictions, but who placed himself at multiple intellectual crossroads. But it wasn't just Simmel's birthplace that symbolized this, but also his family life. Simmel was the youngest of 7 children born to Eduard Simmel and Flora Bodstein. Now, it should be noted that Simmel grew up wanting for nothing in a material sense. The reason was that his father was the founder of Felix and Sorati, which was an extremely successful chocolate company. Despite being well off, though, other parts of Simmel's early life were mired in contradiction. The biggest of these was his religious identity. Both of his parents were born Jewish, but each of them converted to Christianity. His father converted to Roman Catholicism, while his mother converted to Lutheranism, and Simmel himself was baptized as a Protestant. Now, not only did the topic of religion become important to Simmel in some of his later studies, but as Simmel and others have pointed out, anti-Semitism was a factor attributed to some of the problems that he experienced later in life. Now, while much really isn't known about Simmel's early family life, we know that it wasn't stable. Koser describes Simmel's mother as cold and distant, and when Simmel was just 16, his father passed away. After his father's death, Simmel was adopted by a family friend, Julius Friedlander, who was the founder of an international music publishing company. Friedlander left Simmel a sizable inheritance, providing him the freedom to pursue whatever interests that he had. And this is exactly what he did. Simmel attended the University of Berlin and earned a doctorate in 1881, writing on the philosopher Immanuel Kant. A few years later, in 1885, he was hired by that same university as what was known as a Privatdozent, or a lecturer whose salary wasn't paid by the school, but instead by student fees. In other words, he was kind of like an adjunct lecturer. He needed to create classes to spur the interest of potential students. And that's just what he did. First, he lectured on a wide array of subjects. Simmel scholar Kurt Wolff notes his major areas were sociology, philosophy of history, ethics, general philosophy, philosophy of art, philosophy of contemporary civilization, and metaphysics. In addition to this, Simmel's lectures were not a medium just to convey knowledge, but instead became a performance. Koser likens him to a showman who was often seen as thinking through his topics while in the process of lecturing. His lectures became so popular that soon not only students were attending, but all of Berlin's intellectual elite. However, his popularity didn't translate into recognition. Despite support from major figures like the sociologists Max Weber and Edmund Husserl, Simmel never secured a full academic position in Berlin, despite applying to every job that he could. While many attribute this rejection to the prevailing anti-Semitism of the time, others attribute it to his catering to interests that were too varied and less specialized. Simmel finally received a full professorship in 1914 at the University of Strasbourg, located on the German-French border. However, soon after receiving the appointment, World War I broke out and the university's lecture halls were repurposed into hospital beds. Despite attempting to secure a chair at the University of Heidelberg a few years later, he was unsuccessful. However, like the French sociologist Émile Durkheim, Simmel was reshaped by World War I. At first, he embraced German nationalism, even declaring in 1914, "I love Germany and therefore wanted to live." But his fervor quickly faded. Months before his death, he admitted he felt tied to Europe's fate, yet longed to stand above it in the redeeming sphere of the spirit. In his final days, his wife noted he no longer followed politics at all, focusing instead on an unfinished book before dying of liver cancer in 1918 at the age of 60. So, what drew me to Simmel? While I'll be focusing on this question in the next few videos, it starts with his definition of society. He didn't see it as something towering above us or locked in institutions, but instead in the multitude of interactions happening between people every single day. However, his appeal is much more. Unlike Simmel, I personally didn't grow up in a city, nor did I come from wealth or academic privilege. But through Simmel, I saw someone who didn't let the system define the limits of his thinking. He moved across boundaries and studied what compelled him. And even when the institutions halted his professional development, he found ways to continue doing his work. In addition, while he was a prolific writer, he was also someone who focused on the art of teaching and lecturing, which is something that this channel is all about. Alright, I want to thank you all for watching, and if you want to keep exploring Simmel's thought with me, make sure that hit that like and subscribe button. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, or critiques, don't hesitate to leave me a comment below. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.